Aldrich Ames passed every polygraph the CIA ever gave him. He had been selling the names of American agents to Moscow for 6 years. 10 of them were already dead. April 1991. The examiner attached the cuff to his arm, the pneumograph tubes across his chest, the metal plates to 2 fingers. The needle stayed flat. He passed? He had passed once before, in 1986, 7 months after he first walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington and handed over a list. He would pass again. The Central Intelligence Agency, an organization whose entire purpose is the detection of deception, strapped one of the most damaging traitors in its history to a machine built to catch liars twice. And the machine told them he was telling the truth. You want to believe you would have caught him? Something in his face, something in the way he held his hands, you would not have. Start with what the machine actually measures. A polygraph does not detect lies. It cannot. There is no organ in the body that produces deception, and no signal that leaves the body when a person says something false. What the instrument records is blood pressure, pulse, breathing rate, and the electrical conductance of skin, which rises when the sweat glands in your palms activate. 4 physical measurements. All 4 of them are measurements of arousal. Fear produces them. So does anger. So does the specific, particular dread of being wrongly accused while wired to a machine in a windowless room. The theory is that a guilty person will react more strongly to the relevant question than to a control question. Did you take the money? Have you ever stolen anything in your life? The examiner watches which one moves the needle more. That is the entire science. David Licken, a psychologist at the University of Minnesota, spent decades attacking that logic. His objection was simple, and it has never been answered. The test assumes that guilt produces a larger physical response than innocence does. But an innocent person facing a question that could destroy their life is often more frightened than a practiced liar who has done this before and knows the rhythm of it. In 2003, the National Academy of Sciences published a review of the entire body of polygraph research. It had been commissioned by the Department of Energy after the Wen-Ho Lee case, when a scientist at Los Alamos was accused of espionage partly on polygraph grounds, and the case collapsed. The panel read every study worth reading. Their conclusion was that the scientific evidence for polygraph accuracy in screening was weak, that the theoretical basis was unsound, and that using it to screen employees for security clearances was likely to produce more false accusations of innocent people than actual catches of spies. The agencies kept using it. There is a reason for that, and it is not the reason you would guess. Now go back further to the assumption underneath all of it, that people leak. That the truth escapes through the face, the hands, the voice. If you only know how to watch. Paul Ekman built a career on that idea. He cataloged the muscles of the human face into a coding system, and he described what he called microexpressions. Flashes of true feeling lasting a fraction of a second before the mask comes back down. It is a genuinely elegant idea. It became a television show. It became airport security training. The Transportation Security Administration spent roughly $900 million on a program called SPOUT, built on behavioral detection. And in 2013, the Government Accountability Office reviewed it and found no evidence that it worked better than chance. Because here is the problem with leakage. Everybody leaks. The nervous, the guilty, the innocent, the shy, the culturally unfamiliar, the person who simply does not like being stared at. The signal exists. It just does not mean what you want it to mean. Charles Bond and Bella DiPolo went looking for the actual number. In 2006, they published a meta-analysis of every credible deception detection study they could find, covering more than 24,000 individual judgments. They wanted to know how often people correctly identify a lie. 54%. Chances 50. Human beings, across hundreds of studies and decades of research, beat a coin flip by 4 points. And that is not the strangest finding. The strangest finding is who does better. Almost nobody does. Police officers, judges, customs officials, psychiatrists. People whose professional identity is built on reading others, score at essentially the same rate as undergraduates pulled off a campus quad. What separates the professionals is not accuracy. It is confidence. They are far more certain, and they are exactly as wrong. There is a bias buried in the number. People tend to judge others as truthful more often than not, which means we catch honest people accurately and miss liars badly. 61% right on the truths. 47% on the lies. Below chance. You are worse than random at spotting the thing you most want to spot. Sit with that for a second. Your brain, an organ shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of intense social living, in a species where being deceived could cost you food, mates, status, survival, did not develop reliable lie detection. That looks like a failure. It is not. Robert Trivers spent years working on this question and arrived somewhere uncomfortable. The best way to lie convincingly is to believe the lie. If you are not aware you are deceiving, you produce no leakage to detect because there is nothing to leak. Self-deception, in this account, evolved as a tool of deception. The mask works better when the wearer has forgotten it is a mask. Which changes what the polygraph is doing. It is not testing whether you lied. It is testing whether you feel something about the lie. Aldrich Ames felt nothing. He wrote about it later. He had asked his Soviet handlers for advice before his 1986 test, and the guidance he received was almost insultingly simple. Get a good night's sleep. Relax. Be friendly with the examiner. Establish a report. That was it. No drugs, no tricks, no tack in the shoe. The 1994 Senate Select Committee on Intelligence report on the Ames case laid out the failure in detail. Ames was calm because Ames was not afraid. He had been doing it for years. It had become ordinary. And the examiner, sitting across from a pleasant colleague who was making conversation, found no cause for concern. There is a bitter footnote. Ames drove a Jaguar. He had paid cash for a $540,000 house in Arlington on a government salary. The evidence that finally caught him was not physiological at all. It was financial records, patiently assembled, cross-referenced against the dates of his Soviet contacts. Numbers on paper. Not a needle, not a face, not a flicker of the eye. He was arrested in February 1994. The machine that was supposed to catch him had cleared him twice. So what is the polygraph actually for? It works when it works as a piece of theater. The subject believes the machine can see inside them, and belief produces confession. A significant share of polygraph value in real investigations comes from admissions made before, during, or after the test by people who assumed they were about to be caught. The instrument is a prop. It is effective in the way a lie detector in a film is effective on people who have watched films, which is why so much of it survived. Not because it detects deception, because it produces the feeling of being detected. Now bring it home, because this is not really about spies. You are running the same broken instrument every day. You decide someone is hiding something because they would not hold your gaze, when the research on gaze aversion shows almost no relationship to deception at all. You trust the confident one in the meeting. You read hesitation as guilt. You read fluency as honesty, when fluency is mostly a measure of how many times a person has told this particular story. Timothy Levine calls the underlying pattern truth, default theory. Most of the time, you simply assume people are telling you the truth, and you do not examine the assumption unless something forces you to. It sounds like gullibility. It is closer to infrastructure. A world in which you verified every claim would not function. Conversation would collapse. Commerce would collapse. The default is not a flaw in the system. The default is the system. The cost of that arrangement is real, and it is paid by the people who trust the wrong person. But the alternative cost, universal suspicion, is higher, and every society that has tried it has been miserable. So the honest answer is not that you should learn to read faces better. There is no set of tells to memorize. The tells do not exist reliably enough to matter. The answer is duller and more useful. The things that actually catch liars are the things that caught Ames. Records. Consistency across time. Whether the story survives contact with independent evidence. Whether the money adds up. It is slow, unglamorous, and it works, and it requires you to give up the pleasant fantasy that you can look at a person and know. Return to the chair. April 1991. The cuff that tubes the plates on 2 fingers. A man who had gotten 10 people killed, breathing evenly, chatting with the examiner about nothing in particular, watching the needle draw its flat and honest line. Aldrich Ames passed every polygraph the CIA ever gave him. The machine was never broken. It was reading him perfectly. He simply had nothing left to hide from himself.